Hello everyone. I'm Véronique Prugnot. I'm a founder and co-director of The Eyes, which is a publishing house and a production agency. And we organize The Eyes Talks by The Eyes since now 7 years at Paris Photo, and we're always really happy to see this enthusiasm from you, the public, but also by the artist. And the concept is very simple. It's giving the parole, the speech to the artist around their last publication. And it's a 15-minute short conversation we're gonna have. And then you, audience, can ask questions. There's a Q&A, so please don't be shy and keep your questions for the end of the discussions. So today we have the pleasure for this first session of the Artist Talks to host Maja Daniels.
Hello.
Hello, Maja. We're here for your last book, Gertrude, published by Void. So Maja, you are a Swedish photographer based in and born in 1985. You studied in sociology and can be described as a multi-layered academic and artistic practice that includes sociological methodologies, sound, moving image, archive materials, aiming to further explore each medium's narrative and performative functions. Your research interest lies in the invisible ties between history and the present, and how to represent and how the representation of historic events and personal memories can reshape how we read and understand contemporary events. You already published a first book, Elf Dahlia, at MAC, published by MAC in 2019, that explores themes of language, history, ritual, mystery, and the strangeness of the everyday. And it was nominated for this first book at Aperture Paris Photo Award in the same year, and won the Swedish Photo Book of the Year in 2020. It has since expanded into an internationally touring exhibition. Congratulations for that. It's a good start. And your second book, so Gertrude, was released with Void in 2024, so this year, and it seems to stand like an extension of your first title, kind of like a second chapter, but we'll talk about it afterwards. So first of all, of course, the question is, who is the protagonist, Gertrude? How did you come to make a project around this mysterious child?
Thank you. Lots of words. So nice to be here. So, can you hear me? So Gertrude Svensdotter, who is the protagonist of this work, was born in Älvdalen in 1660. Well, no, she wasn't born in Älvdalen, but in 1668, in Älvdalen, she was accused of having walked on water as a 12-year-old girl. A 9-year-old boy accused her. And this was the event that kind of ignited the Swedish witch hunts. And this all took place in the same community, in the same place as my first book evolves around. And it's the place where I'm from. It's called Älvdalen, semi-north of Sweden. And yes, who is she? We don't know much about her. We hardly know anything about her, except that she was accused of having walked on water. So a 12-year-old girl enters into history and is part of the writing of history. But the only thing we have to go on, the only thing that we know, is what's coming out of the church records. Because, of course, in the 1600s, there were no images, no photographs. So I know very little of her, but at the same time, I feel very close to her. What we do know is that I mean, we've learned a lot about the culture around at the time. It's like pre-Christian culture in Sweden, so it's probably pagan. And women at the time played a strong role, had an important role in society, and especially in this kind of forest pasture culture that she grew up in. And I can talk more about that, but I don't know if
No,
I
but it's
should.
interesting. So she grew up in this forest, and that kept kind of a mystery story around her. When we prepared this conversation, you told me your grandma actually used to tell you the story of Gertrude, and it was kind of not a fairy tale, but it's a tale, a child tale that was.
Yeah, I mean, so we had like childhood tales in Sweden, like the common ones, and then there were like the myths of the forest that my grandma used to talk to me about, and then it was of course also this figure, this kind of idea of a person that existed or had existed in this place that I also grew up in, and she, I mean, supposedly could walk on water, and as a child I was very impressed, and I was like, wow, I would have loved to meet her or see her, or you know, like so she was kind of ingrained in my spirit from early childhood. But then as I started kind of looking into the history more and more, of course there is this kind of there's this problem always with, you know, history writing, and you know, whatever you kind of, all of these little scraps of what we actually know from the past tend to just make this huge arc, and then, you know, history is written by the conqueror or the winner, and all of a sudden you start to kind of looking underneath the stones, or like starting to imagine what's going on in the actual gaps. And what we found, or what has been found, is a very kind of strong matriarchal culture that was very important and led by women. And it all kind of took place in these kind of forest pastures, far out into the forest. So people, men, young men, they were not allowed to be alone with cattle because they couldn't be trusted. So it was like a huge crime at the time. A lot of men would essentially, if they were left alone, they would misbehave with animals. So women, it's true. So women were assigned to take care of the cattle and the animals. And in Älvdalen, it was very poor community, very poor soil. So for practical reasons, all the kind of land needed to be like grown and taken care of for food. So the animals had to be shipped far out into the forests. And who could take them? Well, the women, because they were the ones allowed to take care of the animals. So for that reason, societal kind of practicalities made like women had their own kind of culture in these forest pastures.
During 2-3 months, they were by their own?
The whole summers. They walked out in the forest and they came back in the autumn. So early May they left, and they had a very autonomous and very strong position as well within society. And this is something, of course, that the church didn't quite understand or like. Also, of course, when you so far away from society, you have to learn to take care of yourself. So like plant medicine and all sorts of kind of knowledge related to survival, it was common knowledge and practice. And that's something that the southern monks, when they came, they also had that kind of knowledge within the church. They didn't quite like that these women knew about this. Anyway, so all of that.
That's how the myth started also.
Well, that's not the myth. That's the forgotten information. Yeah. So what I try to do with the work is to kind of like, with that knowledge and with that information, to kind of fill out the gaps, essentially.
You often juxtaposes in this book intimate portraits with images of the spaces Gertrude inhabits. What is the significance of the visual contrasts between the images of Gertrude and her environment, and how do they reflect themes of isolation or connection? How this space, why is this space so important in this story?
Well, I mean, there are no images of Gertrude, of course. So what I've done is I've photographed women and girls who I have encountered. And then I've also revisited the archive of Ten Lars Persson. It's an archive that exists in Älvdalen.
Which is amazing archive.
It's an incredible archive. I mean, yeah, my first book was also based partly on working with that archive. So this is also the follow-up of working with his archive. 5,000 glass plates of absolute geniusness. Yeah, but so it's me looking at or for her through the gaze of others, through an archive, but also through my own kind of practice. And then, of course, the places, the many of the locations that I photographed in were the same locations where the witch hunts took place in the 17th century. These places are still standing. It's log cabins, and like these forest pastures are often actively used still. So 400 years later, the same places are active, and now for different reasons than back then, of course, but still, I mean, with the purpose of small-scale production and a different kind of life. So there are other people kind of who are attracted to these places today, often kind of with ecological visions, etc., which I found very inspiring. But what was the question? The kind of the contrast,
well,
the juxtaposition.
The contrast and because you constructed your books through, let's say, 3 chapters. Can you tell us more about how did you construct the narratives? Because there's a mix of space, archives, your images.
So, of course, you know, when working with history or like thinking about time and the medium of photography, for me, there's this kind of idea of a warping time, or this creating this sense of kind of timelessness. So I kind of work in 3 chapters, also kind of working quite strongly with visual tropes. So of course the black and white image has a certain kind of visual trope and a certain sense to it, and then you have the kind of very colorful tropes with a lot of fires and kind of light leaks and kind of a lot of drama. That's the only section, kind of the second chapter, it's the only section where men are allowed in this book. But in that section, it's a lot about the idea of rumors, or it's like the bonfire as a place of like telling stories, or you know, the idea of like marking that, putting that little seed that then could flourish into horror, essentially. But it's also something deeply human, you know, to gather around the fire. And then there is this kind of third chapter that comes into this like later part of the book, where you have more prominent archive material, and where you have this kind of third visual trope, which is kind of really faded or like almost very damaged images, which is also to kind of hint at that we kind of lose track of time here. We enter into a totally different world, and there is a sense of something happening perhaps at that section, and then you're out or you're gone. And there's just this kind of notion or a glimpse at potential magic, without giving away too much, because there's also a reason for the underworld to have shut the doors to us today.
You were telling about, you were saying when we were talking previously, I love this expression, you said Gertrude queered history. I loved it.
Yeah, or I queer history, or she queered history. But I look at her as a trickster figure, because of course it's incredible to think that a 12-year-old girl wrote history by simply existing. You know, she was accused of something by someone else, and she goes, you know, and makes history, and we remember her only for that. So what I'm trying to do is create another kind of visual idea or a world around her and around her existence that could also somehow give her a sense of dignity again, because also she's a complicated figure in history, because she was accused, and then she was imprisoned, she was tortured, she was extremely badly treated, and this is like very well documented in the church records. She was sexually assaulted by the priest, and that's just what they did. And so for me, having kind of read that about her and understood that about her, I wanted to give her world life again, and to show kind of a different history.
Rehabilitate her.
Yeah, and an alternative kind of idea of what the way that we kind of just take history for granted. Once you start really looking into the details, there's so much opening up, there's so much more information. And then, I don't know, I mean, there's research done about remembering and DNA, etc. So what I'm just trying to do is kind of like inhabit her somehow and remember for her and give a broader kind of idea of what her world might have looked like and everything else that we don't know about her.
The green text at the end of the book, what is it? Does it tell the story of Gertrude in a way? What is the purpose of this text?
Well, the purpose is also to kind of give a real kind of critical sense of what my standpoint within the work. And it is really to kind of question history, but also to understand that, this idea of like exploitation of natural resources that takes place everywhere in the world is something to kind of be suspicious about, and to understand that it comes with implications, and it comes with serious implications that have long-lasting effects. So, I mean, it's also to kind of position the work as a way of, okay, this is a glimpse into, for me, the book is about what we might have lost. It's about trying to reawaken something that might have been lost within, like, the process of the witch hunts and the kind of entrance of modernity and the loss of the commons and a lot of the things that kind of Silvia Federici also writes about in terms of what actually started with the witch hunts and is still going on to this day. And to kind of look at, the idea of capital and the idea of positioning of women in society and all kinds of different types of abuse that has happened in history, and what happens if we don't acknowledge that.
There's a symbol on the cover. Can you tell us what it is about?
Yeah, the symbol, it's kind of like the idea is for the symbol to be as a kind of a grimoire for the book, and it's a ristning. It's been inscribed in one of the firehouses, in one of the log cabins that still stands and that exists from the witch hunts. And it's very nicely put. It's in the Black Mountain Forest pasture. And no one really understands where that figure comes from, but because it looks quite diabolic, it's been just connected with the witch hunts. But for me, it's a female figure because you can kind of tell when you start looking at it. It looks a bit like a devil, but it also seems like it has a vagina and it's got tits. And if you know a little bit about the rituals, the kind of pre-modern rituals that existed widely around Europe, the idea of having the stick and the pipe was something that kind of sorceresses were using within rituals. So for me, it's like a strong matriarch that I wanted to kind of put on the cover of the book to kind of also give a sense of the context that I'm reading it in. And so the point is also to kind of change. There is a way that we kind of associate the devil with the very simplistic kind of vision of what that is, or understanding of what that is. But perhaps this is just a rewriting of pagan history. Churches were built often on previous pagan important places, etc. So why not, take a very important figure and, change it if you want to kind of conquer people's beliefs. So I'm reconquering it. I'm taking it back. So your first book was, we said it earlier, exploring themes of language. The second one, this one, is more about rehabilitate history and giving a position to a woman. What would be the third chapter of the next one, if there is a next one? It's going to be about climate.
Climate.
Climate, yeah. The dead wood I'm all interested in dead wood now. Like the idea of what the land has had to suffer. So we had language and the idea of, like power or the science and everything that, all of the kind of issues with language when it comes to also resistance and not speaking. And so and this book, of course, it's about, the idea of also like the issues with myth or the idea of myth making and how to remake myth. But the third book will be related to all the issues that we're facing now with the climate and the woods. There is like in Sweden right now, there is a huge problem because there is not enough forest, funnily enough, or like there are not enough like logs. So they start like massively cutting down a lot of really, really old ancient forests. And the only way to kind of like stop it is to become an activist and start to do inventories in the forests. So you go around and you try and find specific species that you can then use and say, you can't, this is very old forest, you shouldn't cut this down. And often all of those species are centered around dead wood, like dead trees. So for me that's interesting, the idea that, in the forest death produces life, and it also can become the savior of a whole forest. And this is it's a big thing in Älvdalen, so it's also kind of looking at, in the text it's also mentioned about the river and the kind of hydraulic dam that was built. They are now trying to like save it, but of course they can't because the damage is already done. But yeah.
Well, thank you, Maja.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. Do you have questions for Maja on her project? Yeah?
Hi, so I was just wondering, you said you used some archival images, if I heard that correctly. I was wondering what the copyright issues were with that, if you got them from the public library and if you had to get permissions to use them and publish them.
No, I didn't need permission. I was working directly with the Älvdalen Local Heritage Foundation, who are the keepers of the archive. Lars Persson, who is the maker of the archival images, he was the founder of the Local Heritage Foundation. So they host all of his work. But he has been dead for more than 70 years. So then there are no issues of copyright in that sense. But of course, in my first book and also the second book, I've worked very closely with the Local Heritage Foundation to collaborate with them and to make sure that they're okay with me using the images. And one of their main kind of missions are to spread, spread the word of what exists in that archive. So for me to kind of talk about him and to talk about, their existence is in fact good for them. So it's a win-win situation. But it also kind of builds on close collaboration. So both of the works that I made have been exhibited and like presented first in Älvdalen, for example, to ensure that we have an understanding. And of course, they don't necessarily think that, or they might not, I always, like when I exhibit there or show the work there, I always get questions about where are the captions and who are the people in the pictures. And my mission is also to explain to them that an archive can be activated. And an archive can have so many different lives depending on whoever comes into it and looks at it. And for example, it's interesting for me, for example, to have made 2 books now with the same archive, is that every time I go back into an archive, you see things with new eyes. You see things again or like differently depending on what you're looking for. So from kind of an artistic point of view, that is also interesting. Long answer.
Wow, thank you. Time is flying. So thank you very much, Maja.
Thank you.
For
Thanks
the
for
book.
having me.
And you're having a signature at today on the booth?
It was yesterday, but the book still exists.
There, and
at
you're
the booth
here, so we
with
can
Void. Yes.
at Void
And I am here.
booth.
Yes, true.
So
thanks for having
can
me.
meet.